get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down, all right? And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down.
Hey, what do you say, Kneecaps Nation? Welcome to the July 1st edition of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progar, that's me. Happy to be joined, as always, by the man across from me right now, Phil Byrne. Phil, happy July to you, buddy.
Hey, we are in July now, and looks like we're entering into the month with some big news, and maybe not for the Lions, but for a couple of our other Lions sports teams. Of course, we've got
it is Hockey Town, of course.
Yeah, coming back to the Wings. It sounds like Cade Cunningham's probably locking into a big deal with the Pistons too. But let's call a spade a spade. I still think those two teams are a little far off from where our beloved Detroit Lions are at this point.
You throw the Tigers in there too. It's like you got 3 really, really tough deals with those 3 teams. And it's almost like we didn't think we'd ever live to see the day where the Lions were clearly
the class of the town,
more than a foot above the rest. Absolutely. But I will say, Phil, this Sunday we just had, could you ask for a better day? I mean, I don't mean to alienate our loyal listeners outside our little bubble of the Metro Detroit area, but holy smokes, was that a nice Sunday we just came off of?
Well, really strange, too, because it was super, we're not going to get into meteorology stuff here, but it was
we did that a few episodes back. We'll refrain this time around. It
was super warm on Saturday night and almost too hot, to kind of be outside for an extended period of time. Yeah. And it didn't rain unless it rained overnight or something. I just didn't notice it. But went out to my car at like 7:30, 8 o'clock this morning, and that was like 56, 57 degrees. It was kind of almost like a fall morning.
Like as if you're getting ready to watch a Lions game in about 5 hours or something.
Yeah, no, it was lovely. It was awesome.
And we're not trying to wish away summer by any means, but holy smokes, was that nice to be able to experience this past Sunday here. In any case, Phil, before we get into the meat and potatoes of our episode, I kind of want to touch base with you real quick. And if you're new to our podcast here, Phil is the season ticket holder between the two of us, and I'm the peon that stays home and watches the games on the TV. So
hey, you got Sunday ticket. There's sometimes I wish I had Sunday ticket.
False. So ever since they made the transition from DirecTV onto YouTube TV and jacked up the prices tenfold, I dropped that thing like 4th period English. So I am no longer a Sunday ticket subscriber. I have been priced out. So that may change if and when we ever decide to part ways with DirecTV once and for all. That's something that's been discussed. I don't think there's really any traction to that, but it's something that's been discussed. But no, it's just a matter of watching the Lions and then whatever 2 games the NFL gives the Metro Detroit market on a Sunday. And that's really all I have. But
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. Getting sidetracked. Real quick though, not to completely go off, but the NFL did lose their lawsuit for NFL Sunday ticket. This was in the news. I don't think it's going to really bear any significance other than the NFL just having to pay out a ton of money. But it was basically it was a sports bar that didn't want to subscribe to DirecTV to get Sunday ticket. They sued the NFL, and I think it's not just going to one sports bar. I think it's like a collective of people that were in the lawsuit, but it's the rare instance where the NFL actually lost the lawsuit.
So when are each of the fans who are all in on this going to get their $5 check in the mail or something like that? I mean, you hear about that with all these big time corporation lawsuits that everybody that was affected gets like a random $5 check in the mail, and here you go. So
you got to use it on the Fanatics website.
Yeah, there you go. They got you by the straps, regardless of what way you look at it. But in any case, we got a little sidetracked there. But what I want to do, Phil, is I want to check in with you real quick. Speaking of the season ticket angle, and I do this periodically, but what I want to know is, has there been any type of communication from the Lions to you, the season ticket holders, of anything new that may be coming down the pike for you, the season ticket holder this year? Any news on maybe any concessions that may be coming to Ford Field or anything new that is been brought to your attention since we talked maybe 2-3 months ago about this?
No, essentially, not to talk ill of the team or anything, just because it's such a unique feeling of having everything going right. But essentially, they raise prices, and it's very much the same, which nothing to complain about really. I think some aspects of the game day experience could be a little bit better. Um, it is a downtown situation. Parking has always been a little bit of a nightmare. It's either basically um, you can't actually park in the parking garages right at Ford Field, unless you are on the club level and you have the parking pass that comes along with it. Otherwise, you're basically going into a downtown parking garage somewhere, a surface lot, trying to chance it and go over to one of the casinos and park for free and walk over.
And now we're getting to the
Um,
point where everybody and their brother
yeah.
realizes the secret now, and then they all follow suit. And before you know
Mhm.
it, that whole parking deck fills up in a hurry, and then you're still out in the middle of the desert.
Yeah. I think one thing that I would like them to implement at some point in time on the upper level, there's like space for a restaurant in there that this is just kind of outside the box thinking here. They put in like this like win bet, like like one of the gambling apps, like to build a sports bar. And I know Win is a really popular Las Vegas casino. I'll be I'm gonna no one's using the WinBet app here in the state of Michigan. There's 35 different options, and they had the ability to put in like a Michigan restaurant, like I don't know, a Buddy's, I don't know, a Coney Island, I don't know, something like that. They could have put that in there. I because of the job that I do with my work, I get a lot of communication with um, folks who come into town from all over the country, and they want to try a Detroit Coney. They want to try a Verner's. They want to try Detroit pizza. And Ford Field, well, I think has a really awesome game day environment. And a lot of it is because the team is good, and it's just a really awesome place to watch a game. I think there is a little bit of Michigan flavor that's sometimes like lacking in the restaurant selections and stuff like that. Um, so just kind of my 2 cents on that. To answer your question fully, though, there really hasn't been anything. I think we get maybe additional Lions cash basically to use at the concessions and stuff like that, like an extra $50 or something, with the prices being a little bit higher. But that's pretty much about it.
Yeah, I was curious when some of that communication from the Lions organization to the season ticket holders takes place. And I didn't know if it happened around this time or maybe sometime around the time the preseason games get started or what have you to kind of welcome
Yeah,
everybody back. Here's some of the things that's going to be taking shape for this season, da 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 da. So we'll keep
yeah,
tabs on that as things go. But that's a good call out, Phil. Not to get too far down this road here, but that's one thing I've noticed as well that it just kind of seems like your generic NFL
yeah.
stadium. There's nothing in there that kind of screams, you're in Michigan, you're in the Detroit market. This is something that we have to offer you that you can't get anyplace else, with the exception of who's even their pizza provider? Is it still Hungry
It's
Howie's, or did
no,
they?
it's Little Caesars now,
But that's right, because they're the
but
official.
yeah,
But we're at the point now where you can get Little Caesars nationwide. I mean, you
I
got
mean,
Stafford out there in L.A. doing Little Caesars commercials for the NFL. So there's nothing that you go to Ford Field to get that you can't get at any other NFL stadium.
yeah, it's and I don't know if that's simply based on the concession company that they have and some of the licensing purposes and stuff. But what I'm trying to say is basically on that third level, there is space for maybe not a huge restaurant, but a restaurant. At one point in time, Comerica had a Leo's Coney Island that was in there, which I mean, you can get a Coney in there, you can get a Coney, elsewhere on the normal concourse. But I would just say I think that's the one thing that I think is a little bit lacking in there.
Absolutely. So if you tuned in last week, which we sure hope that you did, you would have heard that we broke down the Lions defensive line and linebackers to sort of preview what we're going to be looking at for this year's 2024 Detroit Lions. So we left off right at that point, and a good place to pick up would be the back end of that Lions defense, which is the corners and the safeties. So what I kind of want to do is reverse a little bit. Last week, we kind of talked about the returners first and sort of weaved in the newbies after the fact. The unit that was last year, to say they got shredded in 1,000 pieces on a regular basis is an absolute understatement. You can just take the last 3 games of a regular season and use that as your reference point there. 411 yards to Nick Mullins, the third to last game of the season. Second to last game of the season, it was 345 yards given up by the secondary to Dak Prescott. And then in the final game of the season with Nick Mullins again, they gave up 396 yards through the air. So that was kind of emblematic of what we looked at the entire regular season. They kind of stiffened up a little bit through the air in the playoffs, but that was still a significant weak point of this Lions team last year. So it was, of course, going to be big time priority for Brad Holmes and company. And mission accomplished by the Lions. Brought in through the draft Terrion Arnold out of Alabama, Ennis Rakestraw after that out of Missouri. And then you also brought over Carlton Davis in free agency and Amik Robinson in free agency as well to kind of be the nickel corner guy. So a lot of additions to add into the mix for the Lions corner room. And we spent a good amount of time around the draft and around those free agency periods talking about that in greater detail that you can reference in previous episodes. But Phil, I don't think there's any question about it. They made that unit from a weakness into my mind, a strength.
Yeah. 2 years ago, the Ford Field facade, if you will, that has the Lions players on it. They had Jeff Okudah and Armani Oruwariye on as featured players on that. What
are they doing these days?
Listen, I know Okudah was in Atlanta and he didn't do a whole lot of nothing last year. You know, Oruwariye, was he in the UFL? You got me, man. Like, where is he at? You know, Cam Sutton was in the Lions pregame hype video. I watched it just randomly a couple days ago. Just feeling an absence of football on YouTube, and he was in there. These are guys that were not up to par for a championship level football team. And yes, there is a little bit of a roll the dice on some rookies with Arnold and Rakestraw to bring them in. But you have a guy in Carlton Davis that you brought in that has the championship pedigree. He played at a high level in Tampa. And I think he is going to be able to bring a veteran presence that I think this is a little bit of a move that I really liked at the time when we made it. And then we added DJ Reader, and then we added Zeidel on the offensive line. And you almost kind of lose track of this move. I think when we actually get 2 games, I think he's actually going to make the biggest impact amongst these vets that they have brought in, just because of that veteran presence that he's going to bring. And I think Terrion Arnold has like Pro Bowl caliber ability. Corner traditionally is the hardest spot for rookies to play in the NFL. There's so much to learn. There's so much pressure on you. It is a passing league. Pass interference is something they'd love to call, you know? So just having that guy on the other side is going to alleviate so much pressure off these 2 guys. And I'm looking forward to seeing it.
And the best part is you mentioned the veteran presence. That's all fine and great and everything like that. But in my mind, the biggest plus about bringing in a Carlton Davis is that you can ask him to get in there and start right away. You're not going to ask a guy like Cam Sutton, who, again, in case you've been living out from under a rock the last 6 months, he got in a little bit of a trouble with the law there for a little bit. And when by the time he came out of hiding, all of his luggage and belongings was sitting out at the curb at the Allen Park facility. So the Lions, as we spent some time talking about earlier this offseason, we're going to be nobody's Huckleberry in that regard. So Sutton no longer with us. He's back in Pittsburgh, but you could argue that he was never going to be the number 1 guy any place. He just didn't have the chops for it. You got a guy like Carlton Davis, definitely is more in line of what you would expect from a number 1 corner. So you're able to get him in there right away, and you're able to maybe bring in the other guys like Terrion Arnold and what have you in at maybe a slower pace. Again, this is all assuming that you don't have injuries or anything like that that's going to speed up that timeline, but you have the luxury, at least on paper, to be able to bring those guys along at a slower pace.
Yeah, without a doubt. I I think we'll see with Racestraw, but I mean, I would anticipate that you're going to see Arnold as, a week one starter, but um, that's going to be tough. I mean, his first game, if he's starting, is going to be against Stafford, but you bring in Davis so that you got someone to go up against Puka Nakua, that you're going up against someone who's going to be that number one receiver that you got to go up with. Well, technically, I mean, I guess they still have Cooper Kupp too. So, um, well, he's not going to get off the hook that easy, but
Absolutely not.
but it just bears witness that that is such a huge move and one that's going to help the team.
So that's going to be exciting to see how these new guys coming in are going to look, at least out the gates here. Some of the returners, Khalil Dorsey will be back to add to the cornerback depth room. Stephen Gilmore, who we saw in bits and pieces in some mop-up duty and maybe a little bit of injury pinch hitting at times, but didn't really see a whole lot of him. Emmanuel Mosley also back this year. He was the guy who was a big free agent signing this past season, coming off a bad ACL that he sustained with the 49ers, came back about midway through the season, 2 plays into his season, tore his ACL again. So we probably won't see him until at least, I would say, assuming his recovery is going okay, late September, October at the earliest. And you never even know if they like what they see out of the young guys. He might not even be around by the time roster cuts take place at the end of the preseason. We'll have to see about that. And then, of course, Face Mask Vildor is on the roster heading into training camp as well to round out the cornerback room.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of those guys are just depth. They're going to play on special teams. Some are going to be preseason cuts or training camp comps or whatever you. But I do want to see a little bit more of Stephen Gilmore. I mean, I think we've only really been able to see him play in preseason. He was one of those guys that wasn't hurt, but was a lot of did not dress. For a lot of the games as one of the kind of extra guys that was on the roster. So I know we added to the depth a little bit, but a little bit of addition by subtraction there with Sutton gone, and like you said, Mosley. I would assume if he is healthy at some point, you're going to want a guy with his veteran, skill set back there as well. But kind of in the meantime, I would love to see Gilmore out there and actually play a little bit.
Absolutely. And taking a look at the safeties, we saw some breakthrough performances by a couple of different guys last year. We really saw Ife Melifonwu really come onto the scene about the time the calendar flipped over to December. Finally, after all these years, it seems like he's been with us for a handful of years, but it seemed like he finally showed what he was capable of down the stretch last year. Kirby Joseph has been a stud for us ever since he was drafted just a couple of years back. And you also have CJ Moore, who you may remember was part of the guys who were suspended for the on-site gambling a couple of years back with Jameson Williams. He served a suspension as well. He's in the safety room, and the Swiss Army knife of the Detroit defensive backfield, Brian Branch. You can put him in a number of different areas. He's back for year number 2, and one that my wife is a tremendous fan of, and rightfully so. Be interesting to see what we're going to get out of him for year number 2 with the Lions.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. I mean, basically they're rolling with like 4 guys, 2 at each spot. With Branch being a little bit of the jackknife kind of guy. So, um, it's kind of interesting. Like I think they have a lot more players at the cornerback spot right now, and a lot of that is because you drafted 2 guys. But I wouldn't be so shocked if it could be a complete no name guy, but if they do try to at least get one more body in at safety, because a lot of times a safety is a great player to have on special teams as well, just because they can kind of do a lot of everything, just from an athletic standpoint. So,
And let's not forget
little
they got the kid out of Utah they traded up for in the 4th round who can play a little bit at running back and has also seen quite a bit of time at safety at Utah as well. So in a pinch, you could ask him to serve a dual role as well.
You know what? That's a good point. That is a good point. And honestly, until we get to training camp and actually see what his reps turn out to be, it would be kind of crazy to see, in the same game to have him get like a carry and then, you know, go play on a passing down and go record a tackle or something like that. But it sounds like he's willing to do it.
So, given what we've discussed the last 2 episodes between the 3 levels of the Lions defense, do you think that they are more set up for more positive situations to where they're not going to be giving up 411, 345, 396 passing yards per game on the regular? Or do you think things are still a little bit more of a work in progress and they may or maybe another offseason away from really having this defense humming?
So it's a couple different things. One, I think the run defense is still going to be kind of on that elite level. I haven't really seen anything that would prove it otherwise. I think they've got the pieces in place that are good at stopping the run. Jack Campbell's only going to get better when it comes to, pre-snap reads and kind of figuring out where the play is going to go, and kind of working with Anzalone and the guys back there. What I think is going to really change this defense, though, we are in a passing league. It's very rare where you can go over a stretch of like 3 straight games and just not give up 300 yards through the air. There's
This
too
isn't
many.
like the Michigan State no-fly zone of like
Yeah,
2013-14.
yeah. I think truly what is going to win the Lions games and win the division and get them to where they want to do is to shut down running quarterbacks. And I think there's still enough athletic quarterbacks in the league that you can expect them to get 40 yards rushing or so, when you're playing some of these elite athletes. It's just the nature of them getting the ball quite a bit, broken plays, this, that, or the other thing. It's the 3rd and long that in while there could be a guy open 25 yards downfield, it becomes more advantageous to just take off and run. That is truly, if the Lions can cut some of that stuff out, and I don't know if I think we kind of broke it down a little bit, but I think a lot of that's going to come down to Jack Campbell get more reps and kind of just seeing where things are at. I think he's got the athletic ability to kind of do that from the second level there. Um, I think that's going to be a huge key. You're going to be facing 2 of the more athletic quarterbacks in the league in the division, so you're playing these guys 4 times. Who knows how quickly the Vikings are going to get JJ McCarthy out there as well, but of course he is a threat to run as well. So it's not going away, and it's something that the Lions have to get better at. I think there's still going to be broken plays. I think there's still going to be quarterbacks getting 300 yards. I just don't think there's much you can do with that. Maybe more aggressive, going for interceptions and things like that, I would say. But for me, I want to see them really just slow down the Russian quarterbacks.
Well, and the thing you got to be mindful of as well is I can't think of a division where you have more young receivers in one place like you do in the NFC North. You obviously have Chicago you have Keenan
Yeah.
Allen that came over in the offseason. You have DJ Moore, who came over a year ago, and then you have Adunze, whom they drafted over in Minnesota. You've got Jefferson, who just got re-signed. You have Jordan Addison, and then Green Bay. It seems like they got 6 or 7 young receivers that could go off on you at any point. But it seems to me like they weren't so much burned by the talented receivers. And we saw these quarterbacks put up the big numbers through the air. It seemed like the Lions, through their own offense, were able to weather those storms. Like you said, Phil, it was those running quarterbacks where that seemed to cripple them. And they were able to handle, okay, if just if Justin Jefferson goes off for 150 yards receiving, we're able to combat that in other ways. But if Jefferson's going to get his and we need to worry about a running quarterback threat, that just seems like it's a bridge too far for that defense.
Yeah, because then it's just when you're getting cut both ways, and the only thing that you can stop is a run up the middle or run to the outside from a running back. Like, there's only so much you can do, and while the Lions have an offense that should win a lot of shootouts, why get into a shootout? If you can limit a team to 17 points or less, and I think ultimately that's what the goal is.
And ideally, the Lions don't want to be in shootouts. They want to be able to run the ball effectively. They want to be able to control time of possession. And of course, if you are jumping out to early leads, which again, a point of emphasis for the Lions is to start fast. And anytime that you put another team on their heels, put them up against it, of course, they're going to be throwing the ball more. And of course, that's going to be putting your corners and your safeties in more of a position to need to make a play to keep the game tipped in your favor at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you were listening to this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Progar and Phil Byrne along with you. Glad you could be with us as we head into the month of July. We are halfway through the year 2024, if you can believe that. So that puts a wrap on the Lions defense heading into the 2024 season. Let's take a look at special teams, Phil. So we made mention of this at the signing a couple of weeks ago. The Lions went out and signed Jake Bates, kicker of the Michigan Panthers of the USFL, familiar with Ford Field as that's the arena that he played in during his USFL days, so familiar with the surroundings. They still have Michael Badgley on the roster from the last couple of seasons. It seems, though, as we said a couple weeks ago, Phil, the position of kicker was such a bastion of consistency over the last several decades. More of a question mark the last few years, and even this year, we're not entirely sure what we're going to see from Bates at the NFL level. Is it going to be Badgley that winds up getting the majority of the kicking reps this year? Will they keep two kickers on the roster for this season in games? Still some questions.
I think leading into Bates signing a 2-year deal and a little bit more guaranteed money than a couple of the other teams shows the Lions were interested and they like him a lot. But that does not guarantee anything. Being a starting kicker in the NFL when you are not a Jason Hanson tends to be a lot of you'll be a kicker in one place for 1 year and then all of a sudden you'll bounce around and be a starter 2 seasons later. Like it's just there's really just no in between. There's a handful of guys that you consider to be elite, but very few teams are using a lot higher resources than they used to. It seems like every year there's a kicker that's getting bandied around about possibly being a second or third round pick now on a consistent basis. It's one of those things that I don't think Jason Hanson's walking through that door with just his consistency and what you can get from there. Or even a Matt Prater, a guy with a booming leg. But if you got a guy that you feel confident on every extra point attempt, he's going to hit an extra point and make it. He's money from within 40, and then can hit a long one every once in a while. I think just the peace of mind is going to be there. It's not going to change how Dan Campbell is going to run the team or run the offense. I think he believes in the mental psyche of having the confidence with your team that you can go for it on fourth down or a long third down or something like that. But it's just very, very tough, I think, to feel great still about where we are with this game until we actually get to some preseason and see what Bates has to offer.
And that's going to be tough because I think it's almost to your benefit to be able to see what these guys can do in a big spot. And that's where it gets kind of dicey because these games, once week one against the Rams kicks off, actually mean something. And I don't see how you're able to really call the game differently, like you said, Phil, if Dan Campbell shows that he goes for it just as much as any head coach in the NFL. Now, you can debate whether or not it's the chicken or the egg situation, if it's because he doesn't have enough confidence in his kicking game and knows that, okay, the only way I'm confident that we're able to come out on top in this situation is if we let our offense do the job instead of putting it just solely in the hands of our kicker. Or I like the odds of getting 7 points in this spot more than I like his ability to go out and get 3 for us. We'll just have to see. But I think you're right, Phil. It's going to have to come down to getting them reps in preseason. Even though the stakes aren't going to be as high, it's going to have to come down to repetition, especially for a guy like Bates getting his first taste of the NFL.
Yeah, and I think with Bates, you're gonna probably see Dan Campbell allow him to kick in a long, like I just see if the situation presents itself where it's a longer kick, just seeing if he can do it in a game situation, because he was able to do it in the UFL a couple times. So you know, I don't I still feel like if it's a 52-yard kick, Dan Campbell's just going to try to go get the first down, instead of kicking, if it's a real game in the regular season. But
And the
needless to say,
analytics, if you're big into analytics,
yeah,
the analytics in almost every situation, it seems like nowadays, does favor going for it on fourth down unless it's well into plus territory. It
oh
seems
yeah,
like the days of the 50-plus yard field goal being a quote unquote good idea seem to kind of be a thing of the past.
yeah, absolutely. And it's just kind of where we are now, and what the kicking game is like.
So let's go from more of a question mark to a definite sure thing with the punting game. Jack Fox, boy, has he stepped up and really made a big difference at punter for the Lions, really doing a great job of flipping the field. And it hasn't always been candy nuts and gumdrops for the Lions offense over the last couple of years. There's been times where they can go up and down the field and score at absolute will. And then there's times where they go a couple of quarters in a row where it seems like even getting a first down is like the hardest possible scenario for this offense. And they just kind of disappear at random spurts of time. And you got a guy like Jack Fox that you can send out there to really boom that ball into opposing territory and really flip that field around and give your defense a shot to keep this thing within reason. That's a valuable asset they have at punter for the Lions.
Yeah, he is absolutely, just very consistent. And I know for him that first year of having Goff and Campbell and, all these moving pieces, where we just didn't have much going offensively. Um, I, like he was almost the offensive MVP, for Campbell's first season. And as this offense has improved and gotten better and gotten into like this elite, status, he's almost kind of a forgotten guy. But we're glad he is because he's the punter, and you don't want to have him on the field, So, but he's still good at really pinning teams back when he needs to, or just not choking, and it's so easy to mess up a punt, and then you would just never think about it, but it's one of those things that's a lot harder than it looks, quite honestly.
Absolutely. I think the likelihood of just the average person shanking one off the side of their foot is the more likely scenario. With Fox, it seems like dumping it inside the 15-yard line seems to be a more likely scenario for this guy. And again, lucky to have him on the team. And last but not least, this is really the forgotten guy, but worth mentioning. It seems like Don Muehlbach was going to just be in this organization forever. Like, what did he clock? About 20 years in the Lions organization. He finally went off and earned his well-deserved retirement. So the question is, what are the Lions going to do at long snapper? In comes Scott Daly, who I think this is his third year, and It's one of those things where he seems to have taken over as the Lions' long snapper of the future, and who knows, maybe he's got another 15 years left in him.
Hey, long snapper's a great gig. It really is. I think most probably get paid, you know, NFL minimum salary deal, but basically, if you just don't screw up and you're consistent and you're a good teammate, I'm pretty sure you've got a job for as long as you want it, right? And yeah, so long as he just doesn't botch anything, he's as good as gold in my book.
Yeah, that's the. I mean, it's easier said than done, of course. But again, that's the
Yeah.
one guy who you never want to hear a word about. If you hear Scott Daly's name, the chances are that means something not so great happened.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than having a long snapper who's got the yips, and just can't put it on target, or their hands get too sweaty or something. I've seen it before. It's not a great look.
So that's the defense and the special teams unit. So that just leaves the offense that we'll look to break down on our next episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. We appreciate you being with us. And don't forget, as you happen to be traveling both outbound or inbound this 4th of July holiday weekend, we invite you to take us with you. And don't forget, you can listen to previous episodes of Kneecaps for Breakfast in case there's anything that you may have missed over the course of the off season. And above all else, have fun but be safe this 4th of July weekend. For Phil Byrne across the way, Vince Progar saying good morning, go Lions, forward down the field, over and out.